Hi, this is your host Sapnil Bhartiya and welcome to TFLS Talk. Today we have with us Ian Wagner, co-founder of Stadia Maps, and Luke Seelenbinder, co-founder and CEO of Stadia Maps. Ian, Luke, it's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be back on the show here.
Really great to be back.
It's my pleasure to host you here today. And I remember our last conversation a couple of years ago where we talked about Stadia Maps, but a lot has changed in these years. Now we have self-driving vehicles, a lot of location-based services and products. We rely a lot on maps without realizing it. So I want to ask you, how do you see the role of Stadia Maps today versus when you created it a couple of years ago?
I think when you look at when we created Stadia Maps to be an affordable, supported, and really usable platform for developers to create products that needed something with location. And when you look at the need for maps or the need for routing or the need for location-based APIs, 8 years ago when we created Stadia Maps, and today the need has only grown. We see, like you mentioned, self-driving cars. We see so much more in the ways of what we need location data for. That means it's all that more important. And at the same time, you mentioned open data and open data's usefulness, its coverage, like its global coverage, and even its use in the industry has significantly grown over the last few years. So really, when we created Stadia Maps 8 years ago and today, we see essentially our thesis is validated. Open data, open mapping is the future. And we're getting to take advantage of that with a lot of years of experience.
Just to add a couple of things on top of that, and it's not just us. You can see what Meta is doing, for example, as a huge validation. Them acquiring Mapillary, which is a open street mapping platform with image capture. Meta, AWS, and Microsoft all contributing to open rendering libraries, government organizations joining the OpenStreetMap Foundation and using that as, in some cases, their primary source of truth. There's been a big shift in the industry going more open. TomTom's another great example, by the way. They also very much believe in the future of open source and open data. And then I would also add another thing that's changed in the world is the future of mobility. It's not just self-driving cars. It's also more sustainable low-speed electric vehicles. And these are something that is, we can talk a little bit about later, but we believe this is a very much underserved market in the routing space right now.
Back in the early days, OpenStreetMaps were quite popular, even with consumers. But today, we all rely on either Apple Maps or Google Maps. Even cars have either of these two options. While companies like Tesla use their own maps, many car manufacturers are ditching their own ill-built navigation system for these two options. So what kind of market is there for Stadia Maps today?
I think we're seeing a bifurcation in the market. As you said, Tesla, they're building their own maps. They have so many vehicles on the road with all these sensors. They're building a map for the cars. Where we're seeing more adoption in open data on the consumer side is in use cases like golf cart routing in Florida and Georgia. These things are just not served at all by the mainstream players like Google and Apple Maps. We're also seeing a lot of startups in the low-speed vehicle space, which are usually like 1-2 seat cars. These are targeting major urban centers like Detroit to LA. That's where we're seeing a lot of growth in the open data.
I think another important aspect when we look at open data and open source is the usage of maps is so broad, so many industries, so many different applications need it. What we've seen is over the years, the ability for open source and open data to address each of those industries, kind of one after another as you raise the complexity. Open source is slowly conquering all of those to the point where there's now a industry led conglomerate basically putting together data, open data from companies that used to never share their data. For instance, Microsoft and Meta are sharing data for mapping because they understand how important it is to have accurate data to drive their own products, and they know they can't do that themselves. So we're starting to see open data addressing the needs of the mega corporations, not just small businesses that can't afford to do their own mapping.
Building these kind of services, maps, is a massive undertaking. But the irony is, what I see is that as compared to other industries where open source technology like Linux kernel or Kubernetes, they're dominating, they allow these big players, AWS, Google, Microsoft, I mean, and a ton of other players to leverage these open source technologies and build their own product and services on top of these, the add value on top of that. So why is that not happening in the map world? Why we see the duopoly of these two companies or companies building their own maps like Tesla? Why are they not leveraging open source technologies for their own needs? Or it is happening, but we are not aware of that. So what is the reality?
Yeah, we are seeing it happen. When you look at map data, you have to really understand kind of what you need to use the map data for. When you look at applications like visualization or reports or general analysis, we see there is no edge in creating that yourself. So companies are coming together, taking that base map data, things like cities, roads, land cover, where parks are, things like that. There's no value in creating that data yourself. So companies are coming together, pooling their resources and saying, let's just get one copy that's good enough for everyone. But then when you look at something detailed like self-driving cars, like street level imagery, things like that, there's an immense amount of, like you said, resources that are required to gather that data. Imagine things like lane level guidance or knowing which lane of a road is closed so that when you're driving, you can get the best route possible so that your self-driving car doesn't have to rely on signage that can sometimes be broken, things like that. That type of data is immensely valuable, and it's what these car companies especially are gathering and are not really sharing with other companies.
The only thing I was going to add was on the software side. So Luke addressed mostly the open data side of things. Open source, I think it's kind of already won in most cases. If you look at what all of the big players are using for their routing software, what's in your Tesla? It's Valhalla, which is an open source map engine that was originally developed by a company called Mapsen that sadly is no more. Their development team was hired by Mapbox. Mapbox now uses that for their internal routing, as far as I'm aware. It's what we use at Stadia Maps. On the map tile rendering side of things, for what gives you these nice pretty lines and stuff that help you get around, the majority of companies are building on open source software now. Yeah, I think that open source is kind of already won on the software side of things.
I also want to talk about three aspects of Stadia Maps: commercial, open source, and community.
So Stadia Maps, when we look at our product, we're commercial first, in the sense that our primary product is selling APIs to developers who need to create location experiences. And the vast majority of those services then are built on open source code. So we start with open source and we deploy it, we polish it, and we make it usable for the average developer who doesn't want to run it themselves. And then and this is what we're starting to develop more and more, is we see a gap in the market. We see there is an open source project that's missing, and I'll actually pass this over to Ian to talk about what we've seen in the last few days, or the last few months. But that's where we come in and start creating open source that then forms a community around it. So Ian, if you want to talk about Ferrostar, our latest open source project.
Yeah, so our latest open source project, Ferrostar, addresses the need for an open source navigation SDK. There's a lot of development that's happened over the last decade in open source routing. And routing is like, you tell the computer, I want to get from these coordinates to these other coordinates, and by the way, I'm driving a car, I'm using a bicycle, or something like that. But you get back this data, okay, like that's cool, like we're developers and we can look at that, but how does a user actually make use of that? They want a turn-by-turn guidance experience like you have in Apple or Google Maps. There is no open source SDK that lets you take advantage of all of these great routing engines today. And so we are building that. We have a pretty active community already. It's less than a year old, the project. It's got like almost 100 stars on GitHub. We have 5 active contributors. We've got like 50 people in a Slack channel. There's a lot of interest, and we're having talks with a lot of really interesting companies who want to help build this together, because we're basically all solving the same problems. We're adding our unique bits of value on top of it. Other companies are adding their own unique value, and I think that this is a place where we can all win. And yeah.
And how mature is this community?
We're talking with a couple of automotive companies. We've also got a number of smaller open source developers who are wanting to build various applications with it. And then in the middle, we have, I would say, like mid-sized venture-backed companies with like, 40, 50 employees that are using this for their applications. We're also working with two city government organizations for deploying it across their use, and that would be for the golf cart routing use case, which has 60,000 active users. So that's the kind of the extent of the community usage that we're seeing.
Can you talk about what kind of wider non-traditional use cases that you're seeing of maps or Stadia Maps around the globe?
I think the non-traditional use cases are actually what has been the most fun part of building Stadia Maps. When we started, we thought of all those traditional use cases, navigation, logistics, things like that. But since we started, we have seen our maps in all sorts of products. We've seen use in fitness applications from the beginning, where people just need to get out, plan their bike ride, plan their run. And to do that, they need really good maps, they need really good satellite imagery, and they need to put that together with maybe some routing engine help to know where they can actually go with their bike or on their run. We also see something as esoteric as a Bitcoin ATM network. We've had one of those as our customers since, I think, almost the beginning. It's just a map where you can find the nearest Bitcoin ATM to make your transaction. And these kinds of applications, I could name 100 more. And those are typically not necessarily in North America and Europe. We're seeing lots of usage outside of kind of the traditional hotspots of mapping, because when you look at open data, if anyone can contribute to this, that means that areas that are less serviced by the biggest companies tend to form very good communities. I know of very good communities in the Philippines, in other parts of Southeast Asia, because they know if they go out and map it, they're going to get really good maps from apps like Organic Maps, that's an open source map app for your phone, just like Google Maps, but based on OpenStreetMap. They know if they go out and edit these data, they'll get an even better map experience. So communities form around this to make sure that they have the best maps possible. So I think that when you put the power of mapping in the user's hand, and then they can see the result in a few days or maybe a week, that's where you really see the power of maps outside of the traditional kind of industry halls that we're used to with Google or Apple.
Keeping up with the changes in the real world, sometimes some construction is going on, some roads are closed or new roads are built. How do you folks keep up with this changing map data?
We're only a small part of we're both also contributors to OpenStreetMap. I'm contributing almost every day. So if a road nearby me happens to close, or they add a one-way restriction or something, then, it's up in our maps in, a week or less. But that's just me. There's also a whole lot of people like me around the world, and just like I guess I would just flip the question around and say, how does Wikipedia stay up to date? It's pretty much the same process. There are a whole army of people who really care about this, and like Luke was just saying a minute ago about the people in like Southeast Asia that are building things off of OpenStreetMap. Then it's great because they know that they can contribute the information, and it's reflected in services very quickly. And I think, just dreaming a little bit about the future, I think that AI tools are going to really help with this in the future. And I'm not talking about I'm not going to talk about like ChatGPT or something like that. I'm talking about tools that let you, that like, are sitting in your dashboard and are able to contribute this data up to the cloud and be processed. And like, this is actually something that Facebook's already working on, by the way. So like, this doesn't take very much imagination to do. And then at the micro level, how do you know when a new restaurant opens? Historically, OpenStreetMap has been pretty bad at that, but we're starting to see better like image recognition being included in the mobile editing apps, so that I could walk up to a restaurant, snap a photo of the sign, and it would actually get important information like the opening hours, and then I can make that update right there. I think that we're going to see this kind of stuff start to take off and change the game in open data where it's been historically quite weak.
That also brings another point, which is latency. Now, let's talk about your customers. There are a lot of industries which you cater to, which are very latency sensitive. You folks leverage Akamai technologies to address some of those challenges. Can you talk about that?
I think latency, when you think about a map, it's very important. We have users who are scrolling around on the map, and if your map is slow and you scroll around, you just have nothing there. So not having low latency means the user experience is immediately disrupted because they just don't see anything on the map. So from the beginning, we have focused on reducing latency, having very low error rates, and we've built all of that on top of Akamai's systems. We've actually built our own CDN focused on map data on top of Linode and Akamai. And from there, this started 6 years ago, because we couldn't deliver the latency and the reliability we needed on other platforms, including other CDN platforms. So we've been able to literally build a low latency map CDN on top of Linode for 6-7 years, and it's only gotten better in the last 2 to 3 years, especially. We've been able to transition away from a lot of services we had to manage ourselves to managed Kubernetes. We've been able to add on top of that using object storage instead of machine local storage because latency has gone down on their services. So what we've seen is generally we've maintained a very low latency target. We're talking less than 250 milliseconds per request, while simplifying our own DevOps experience. And that's made our lives simpler, helped us sleep better at night. And at the result, our customers are very happy because they get the latency that they expect. They tell us, compared to such and such competitor, you're so much better. And that's something we accomplish without really comparing to our competitors. We just want to build the best product possible. And Akamai has enabled us to do that.
I mean, Akamai is a pioneer of many fundamental technologies. Nowadays, they talk a lot about distributed cloud. They talk about edge. How does their approach to distributed cloud and their massive presence globally help you folks not only better serve your customers, but also grow globally?
Yeah, I mean, them having data centers basically everywhere has made things really easy. And like on the DevOps side, using things like Terraform to automate and to replicate deployments across regions, it's been a generally quite easy experience. And then also moving to more like cloud native formats, being able to put our geographic data in object storage, be able to access that with low latency in a method that works very well for the characteristics of the medium. It frees us to not have to worry about expanding storage on various VMs and things like that.
AI is one of the hottest topics these days. Now, we can talk about AI, we can talk about Gen AI, machine learning. I want to learn if there is any role of AI or Gen AI in your products and services. And if yes, what is that?
I think so far we've used AI for a lot of the things that every company uses it for. We've used it to make our lives easier. I know that one of the fun things I've done with AI in the last few weeks is I wrote a press release, and it's our best performing press release, and the vast majority of it was written from 4 prompts on ChatGPT. So I think that in the weirdest ways, AI has helped our productivity and even things like our SEO. Ian, I think you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, no, that was great actually. I would say so far it's mostly been um, in the kinds of things that you would expect to hear from other companies. Um, More generally, though, we definitely do benefit from things like the work that Microsoft and the work that Meta are doing with AI as it relates to mapping. Um, we are not, I would say, on the forefront of pioneering that kind of research, but we're definitely benefiting from it.
You were talking about some of those features and functionality. Can you talk about some of the new features, functionalities that you have added to Stadia Maps that improves customers and user experience?
Yeah, satellite, as Luke mentioned, is probably the biggest one. That was a huge feature request for many, many years, and we were finally able to get the partnership together to pull that off. Um, Adding geocoding, which is taking text input and like an address or a name of a famous building or something, and resolving that to location on Earth. Um, that kind of search functionality was also a huge request for many years, and we were able to release that. And another one that you won't hear from too many people, like you won't hear too many people talking about this, but static map images are also a really useful thing. Sometimes when you're building a website, whether it's a cruise line trying to show the path of a path of a cruise, or a tour guide trying to show like these are these walking tours around these various like old European cities. Sometimes you don't actually need the full interactive map, and particularly when you're just like scrolling through something on your phone. And having a static maps image API is really great, and we've made a couple of big improvements to that over the last couple of months. One of them is that you can bring your own marker images. We'll go and request those from your servers, so that lets you really customize the look and feel of the map a lot more. And then another one is that we're enabling caching and print use, which is something that, as far as we're aware, no other competitor is offering this, and we're not entirely sure why. So enabling you to get even more performance if you're super latency sensitive by hosting it on your CDN where you know your users are. Say you're operating exclusively in Germany. This enables you to optimize. It also enables more use cases like print media, which were not historically supported by the maps industry at large.
I'm heavily into cars, sim racing. I drive on tracks, virtual tracks globally. They have real world maps, and those maps change. Apple Vision Pro is there, which you can wear and walk around, and there are a lot of potential of going around the places, museums, and you can travel around the world. Businesses are also offering indoor maps for their facilities. Can you talk about what kind of new use cases that you are seeing for Stadia Maps or maps in general?
We do have a couple people using us in video games. Another one is this isn't really a new use case generally. It's a new use case for us, and that would be like broadcast and film. We're seeing a lot of people expressing interest, and we've actually had multiple TV stations sign contracts with us to use our animated sequences that they've built using our maps on the air.
I think when you look at new use cases, a lot of it is kind of goes with the world around you. When you look at, you've talked about mobility a lot today, and we're seeing a lot more interested companies in that super like micro mobility space. It's companies trying to solve things like scooters or low speed vehicles need that routing, and this is something you never would have thought of 20 years ago. You never would have put together a routing application for a golf cart. But today, that's something we're seeing more and more. And I think when we kind of spin it out 5, 10, 15 years, the number of electric vehicles, especially low-speed electric vehicles, we'll see on streets, on cart paths, on really all around our cities is only going to grow. So I expect the applications for routing applications for delivery logistics companies is only going to grow and to become more complex as we see more and more of these electric vehicles on the streets doing things that we used to use the traditional road network and traditional combustion engine cars for.
What kind of things are on your map, in your pipeline? What kind of things are you folks working on?
The navigation SDK is a huge part of that, obviously. We've talked about that a lot on the call already. I think that we're going to see, possibly even from us this year, more in the way of APIs that are focused around data, not so much around just the map itself. There are a lot of use cases that we're seeing pop up where people want to query the data. And this is a really interesting use case where OpenStreetMap can shine because on the one hand, it's a little bit confusing when you first look at it because it's so freeform, but there is so much data in there and people are actually using it. For example, adding like power grid infrastructure and things like that. There's a massive wealth of data that's in there and in a whole lot of other data sets too. And building APIs that can pull all those together and make it really easy for whether it's a regular, like, regular software developer trying to build a consumer application, whether it's a large company, whether it's a government, there's a lot of people who could be using a lot more of this data. It's just not very accessible right now. So that's something that we're pretty excited about. You mentioned indoors. That's also definitely something interesting for the future. I've talked to at a conference in Estonia in May. I talked to 3 different companies that were doing indoor mapping related things, so that's definitely a hot space. And then also probably no secret, like Apple Vision Pro, definitely putting AR back on people's radar. I'm not sure why it ever left, but I think that there will be more navigation experiences built around that in the future as well.
Luke, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about Stadia Maps. And I look forward to talk to you folks again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.